The rain had been falling since morning, washing the world in silver gray. The sound was soothing at first, but as the hours dragged on, it became a dull reminder of how silent the lake house had grown. Claire Walker stood by the tall window, staring out at the vast water that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The lake shimmered faintly beneath the storm clouds, calm and cold, like her marriage had been for months. Daniel, her husband, had left 2 days ago for a business trip to Seattle. He had kissed her goodbye in a hurry, the same distracted way he'd done for years now. There had been a time when his touch lingered, when his eyes carried warmth. But now, his presence, even in memory, felt distant, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Claire had told herself that this trip would give them space to breathe, to reset. But deep down, she knew that space was exactly what had been growing between them for years. The lake house had once been their escape. A place filled with laughter and long summer evenings on the porch. Now it was just walls and echoes. She had come here to clear her mind, to remind herself that she still had one. The fire crackled softly behind her, and she wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Then a sound, a knock, sharp, sudden, and completely out of place. Claire froze. The nearest neighbor was miles away. The main road was barely visible through the trees. She waited, thinking she had imagined it, but the knock came again, firmer this time. Echoing through the quiet house, she hesitated, her breath catching. For a second, the storm outside seemed louder, pressing against the windows like a warning. Slowly, she walked to the front door and peeked through the small window. A man stood on the porch. He was drenched from the rain, his coat clinging to his shoulders, hair plastered against his forehead. His eyes, tired but alert, lifted when he noticed her shadow behind the glass. He stepped back slightly, raising his hands in a small apologetic gesture. "Sorry to bother you," he said loudly over the rain. "My car slid off the road. I've been walking for miles. I saw your lights. I just need to get warm for a bit." His voice carried no threat, just exhaustion and honesty. Still, Claire's heart thumped fast. Letting a stranger in at night in the middle of nowhere wasn't something she'd normally do. But the way he shivered, the way his lips trembled with cold, she couldn't turn him away. She opened the door. "Come in," she said cautiously. He stepped inside, shaking the rain off his coat. "Thank you," he breathed, his tone heavy with relief. "I didn't think anyone lived out here." "Most don't," Claire replied, watching him closely. "The road gets bad during storms." Smiled faintly, his teeth chattering. "I noticed." She handed him a towel, then pointed toward the fireplace. "You can warm up there. I'll make some tea." He nodded gratefully and crouched near the flames, rubbing his hands together. The warmth seemed to bring color back into his face. He looked to be in his mid-30s, maybe a little older, with kind eyes and a faint scar across his jaw that made him look rugged. "Not dangerous. I'm Ethan," he said after a moment, glancing over his shoulder. "Ethan Cole." "Claire Walker," she replied, pouring hot water into a mug. "You picked a terrible night to be driving." "Yeah," he said with a quiet laugh. "But it's the best place I could have crashed." She handed him the tea, and their fingers brushed. The moment was small, but she felt it. The house that had felt so cold just an hour ago suddenly seemed alive again. They talked cautiously at first. He told her he was a photographer traveling to capture the autumn landscapes for a magazine. His car had spun out near the bridge, and when it wouldn't start again, he decided to walk until he found help. Claire listened, intrigued by the calm rhythm of his voice. He noticed details about everything: the shape of the raindrops on the glass, the way the lake caught flashes of lightning like silver veins. It was the kind of attention Daniel had stopped giving to anything long ago. "You live here alone?" Ethan asked after a pause. "Not always," Claire said. "My husband and I used to come here together. He's away on work." Ethan nodded slowly. "It's a beautiful place. Peaceful. Sometimes too peaceful," she murmured. Their conversation drifted into silence. Outside, the storm grew heavier, wind howling across the lake. Inside, the light flickered gently against their faces. Claire found herself studying him, not with attraction, but with curiosity. There was something steady about him, something unguarded. After a while, he leaned back in the armchair, eyes half closed, his expression softening as the warmth settled into his skin. "You must think I'm crazy," he said quietly. "Showing up like this? I think you're lucky I was still awake," she replied with a small smile. He smiled back. That kind of slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I guess so." The power flickered, and for a second, the house went dark. The fire glowed softly in the blackness, throwing their faces into faint golden light. Claire's heart beat faster, not from fear, but something else she couldn't quite name. When the lights came back on, Ethan's gaze lingered on her, almost studying her the way he might study a photograph. "What?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Nothing. It's just, you seem like someone who used to love this place, but doesn't anymore." His words hit her like a quiet truth. She hadn't realized anyone could see that so quickly. "I used to," she said, her voice low. "We both did." He didn't push her to explain, and that silence, that simple acceptance, was strangely comforting. Later, when she offered him a blanket and a place to sleep on the couch, he thanked her sincerely. "You've been kind to a stranger," he said. "I won't forget that." Claire nodded. "Good night, Ethan." She turned off the lights and went upstairs. But sleep didn't come easily. She could hear the faint sounds of the storm, the crackle of fire, and the steady rhythm of someone else breathing downstairs. The house felt different now, not haunted by loneliness, but filled with something unspoken. She thought of Daniel, wondering if he'd even noticed she was gone from home. She thought of how long it had been since someone had simply looked at her, not as a wife, or as part of a life they once built, but as a person still capable of being seen. When she finally drifted off, it was to the memory of Ethan's quiet voice saying, "You seem like someone who used to love this place." The next morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight spilled across the lake, making everything glimmer. Claire came downstairs to find Ethan standing by the window, his hair still messy, but his eyes brighter. "Morning," he said. "Your view's even better without the storm." She smiled faintly, handing him coffee. "You're seeing it on a rare good day." "I don't know," he said. "Last night didn't seem so bad either." There was a pause, gentle but loaded with something neither could define. He reached for his jacket. "I'll try to get my car towed this afternoon," he said. "I'll be out of your way soon." But as he said it, there was something in his tone, a softness, almost like he didn't want to leave. Claire felt it too. She should have told him goodbye right then. She should have let this story end there, a night of kindness between strangers. But when he stepped toward the door, he stopped. "Claire," he said, hesitating, "would it be all right if I came back later to thank you properly? Maybe bring dinner." She didn't know why she said yes. Maybe it was the way his eyes met hers. Calm, kind, yet carrying something that reached deeper than words. Maybe it was because she was tired of being invisible. Either way, she said softly, "Dinner sounds nice." As the door closed behind him, she realized her heart hadn't beaten this fast in years, and she didn't yet know. That one simple yes would change everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the quiet ache of being seen again. By late afternoon, the storm had disappeared completely, leaving the lake calm and shining beneath the soft October sun. Claire spent the morning tidying the house, not because it needed it, but because she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's promise to return. Every time she caught herself glancing at the clock, she scolded herself silently. He was just a stranger, a traveler she had helped. That's all it should have been. But still, her heart beat faster at the thought of seeing him again. By evening, sky had turned a deep blue, the edges of the horizon glowing gold. She stood near the window, brushing her hair absently, when she saw headlights winding down the narrow road. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if she should pretend not to be home. But something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, told her to open the door. Ethan stood there, holding a paper bag and smiling with that same gentle warmth from the night before. "I kept my promise," he said. "Hope I'm not intruding again." Claire shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Come in." "You didn't have to bring anything. I owed you dinner. he said simply, stepping inside. It's not much, but I tried to cook something decent at the inn nearby. He placed the bag on the table, 2 containers of pasta, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of wine. It wasn't fancy, but it felt real, thoughtful. Claire set out plates while Ethan lit a candle in the center of the table, laughing at his own attempt to make it look civilized. As they sat down to eat, the room filled with quiet conversation. They talked about simple things, the lake, the storm, his travels, her work as an interior designer. She told him how she'd once dreamed of starting her own studio, but life had slowly turned into routine. Daniel's job had taken priority, and she'd learned to let her dreams settle quietly at the bottom of her heart. Ethan listened with real attention. "You talk about your dreams like they still exist?" he said gently. "That's something." She looked at him, surprised. "You think so?" "I know so," he said. "Some people forget how to even talk about what they love." His words hit deeper than she expected. Claire looked away, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "You sound like someone who's seen a lot of people forget." Ethan gave a small, knowing smile. "I photograph people for a living. You start to notice when their eyes stop matching their smiles." There was a pause, long enough for the air to thicken between them. Claire didn't know what to say. She had never talked about her feelings with anyone outside her marriage. And yet, here she was, opening up to a man she had known less than a day. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was emotional, honest, and it scared her a little. The conversation shifted when he asked about the house. She told him how she and Daniel had bought it right after their wedding. It's full of plans for weekends at the lake and holidays by the fire. "We said it would be our forever place," she said softly. "But I guess forever became quieter than we thought." Ethan looked around the room, the old photographs on the walls, the half-burned candles. "The neatness that comes from habit, not joy. It's still beautiful," he said. "It just needs to be lived in again." His tone wasn't pitying. It was warm, sincere. Claire felt something stir inside her, a small reminder that she was still capable of feeling alive as they finished dinner. The fire flickered to life again. The warmth filled the room, blending with the soft hum of their voices. Ethan told her about his travels, the people he'd met, the places that had changed him. There was something poetic about the way he spoke, painting pictures with his words. Claire listened, completely absorbed. At one point, he took out his camera and showed her a few photos. Landscapes, mostly lakes, forests, faces of strangers caught mid-laughter. One image, though, caught her eye. It was a photo of a woman standing alone on a dock, her reflection shimmering in the water. She looked peaceful but distant, as if waiting for something that might never come. "She looks lonely," Claire said softly. "She was," Ethan replied. "But she didn't know how to say it, did you?" Claire asked. He nodded. "Sometimes we see things in others that we're afraid to see in ourselves." Their eyes met. For a few seconds, neither of them looked away. The wind brushed against the windows, and the soft creak of the house filled the quiet. Claire's chest felt tight, not with fear, but with recognition, like she had finally met someone who understood the silence she lived in. Ethan broke the gaze first, clearing his throat and smiling faintly. "I didn't mean to make things heavy. Sorry." "Don't be," she said quickly. It's nice to talk to someone who doesn't just nod and move on." He laughed softly. "Then I'm glad I crashed my car near your lake house." They shared a quiet smile. The night grew late, but neither wanted to end it. When the clock struck 10, Ethan stood reluctantly. "I should let you rest," he said. Claire nodded, though a small part of her didn't want him to leave. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "Thank you for the company." He replied as he walked toward the door. She followed him, the air between them thick with something unspoken. He paused before opening it, looking at her once more. "You really have a beautiful view here," he said quietly, glancing past her to the lake glowing under the moonlight. "But I think you've forgotten to look at it." She looked at him, her throat tightening. "Maybe I have." He smiled, soft and sad. "You should start again." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and Claire stood there for a long time, her heart still racing. The house felt alive again, and for the first time in months she didn't dread the quiet. She walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit lake. The reflection shimmered, and she wondered if, maybe, just maybe, the world hadn't stopped moving after all. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the evening, the conversation, the laughter, the moments that felt like tiny sparks in the dark. Ethan wasn't like anyone she'd met in years. He didn't talk to her as if she were invisible or as if she had already been defined by her past. When morning came, the sky was clear and the air smelled of pine and dew. She brewed coffee and stood by the window, half expecting him to appear again. But hours passed and the road stayed empty, just when she convinced herself he'd moved on. There was a knock on the door. It was softer this time, almost uncertain. Claire's heart skipped. She opened the door and there he was, the same calm eyes, the same quiet smile. He held a camera in one hand and a small bunch of wildflowers in the other. "I was driving back into town," she said, "but I thought I'd stop by. These reminded me of your porch." "Ah," she laughed, surprised. "You picked flowers." He shrugged. "You let a stranger in from the rain? This is the least I could do." It was such a small gesture, but it warmed her deeply. She took the flowers, their petals still glistening with morning dew. "Thank you," she said. "They're beautiful. I wanted to see if you'd let me take a picture of the lake," he added quickly, as if trying to make his visit sound less personal. "The light's perfect today." Claire nodded. "Of course." They walked outside together. The air was crisp, the surface of the lake reflecting the golden morning light. Ethan raised his camera, capturing the scenery in a few soft clicks. Then he lowered it and looked at her. "Would you mind?" he asked gently, gesturing toward the dock. She hesitated. "You want me in the photo?" "Only if you want to be," he said. "You fit the place. It's like the lake's been waiting for you to notice it again." Her heart fluttered, but she agreed. She walked to the dock, the boards creaking beneath her feet. Ethan took a few photos quietly, the sound of the camera blending with the gentle lap of the water. When he finished, he smiled. "Perfect," he said softly. Claire felt the sun on her skin, the breeze on her face. She turned toward him. "You make people see themselves differently, don't you?" He looked at her for a moment. "Only if they let me." She didn't know what to say. There was an understanding in his words, a kindness that went beyond attraction. It was connection, real and deep. And as she watched him lower the camera, she realized that the line between gratitude and something more had quietly blurred. She didn't know where this would lead, or if it should lead anywhere at all. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel numb, and that, she thought, might be the most dangerous thing of all. The morning sun filtered softly through the thin curtains of the lake house, painting the wooden floor with golden stripes. Emily sat by the window, clutching a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Her mind was restless. The night before had been full of unspoken emotions. Not words, not actions, just silence that carried meaning. She had barely slept, turning over everything that had happened since Noah appeared on her doorstep. She looked out at the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the trees that surrounded it. The reflection reminded her of herself, still on the surface, but full of undercurrents below. When she heard footsteps behind her, she didn't have to turn to know it was Noah. He had a quiet way of moving, thoughtful and unhurried. "Morning," he said softly. Standing by the table, "Morning," Emily replied. Trying to sound composed, he poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was gentle, filled with an understanding neither could explain. "I didn't sleep much," Noah said finally, smiling faintly. "Too many thoughts." "About what?" Emily asked, though she already knew. "About why I came here," he said, meeting her eyes, "and about why I can't seem to leave." Emily looked down at her coffee. Her heart beat faster, but she didn't want to show it. "You don't have to leave right away," she said. "You could stay until the storm clears. There's still some work to do around the house." He smiled, that quiet, grateful kind of smile that felt more like a thank you than words could express. "Are you sure?" She nodded. I could use the help." The truth was, she didn't want him to go. The house had felt too quiet before he came, too filled with memories of what used to be. With Noah there, it felt like someone had opened a window and let life back in. Over the next few days, they worked side by side, fixing loose panels, painting the porch, railing, cleaning the garden path that led down to the lake. Emily found herself laughing again, sometimes without realizing it. She'd forgotten what that felt like. Noah listened when she spoke, not just with his ears, but with his attention, as if her every word mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the lake into a sheet of gold, they sat together on the porch steps. A gentle breeze carried the smell of pine and water. "I haven't been this calm in years," Noah said, breaking the silence. Emily smiled softly. "Neither have I." He turned to her. "Do you ever think about starting over?" The question lingered in the air, tender and dangerous. She didn't answer right away. She thought of her husband, Mark, a man who had once filled her days with laughter and her nights with warmth, but whose presence had faded over time into distant routine. Their marriage had become something they both protected out of habit, not love. "I used to think it was too late," Emily said quietly, "that once you've built a life, you can't rebuild it again. But lately, I'm not so sure." Noah looked at her, his eyes deep and steady. "Sometimes it's not about rebuilding. Sometimes it's about remembering who you were before everything else got in the way." His words stayed with her long after he said them. The next morning, Emily received a message from Mark. He would be coming to the lake house for the weekend to talk. He had written. Her stomach tightened when she read it. They hadn't spoken properly in months. She told Noah later that day, her voice unsure. He listened quietly. "Then maybe it's time," he said softly. "You should talk to him. You both deserve that." Emily nodded, though a part of her didn't want the peace they'd built to break. When Mark arrived 2 days later, the air around the house changed. He was polite but distant, careful in his words, as if walking through a room full of fragile things. Noah stayed out of the way, spending most of the time near the lake or helping the old neighbor across the road. Still, Emily could feel the tension to worlds colliding quietly under the same roof. That evening, after Mark had unpacked and the sky turned gray with rain, Emily finally sat with him in the living room. The sound of the lake lapping against the dock filled the silence. Mark looked tired, his eyes dull with guilt. "Emily," he began, "I know things haven't been good. I've made mistakes. I thought maybe we could try again. Maybe we can fix this." She stared at him for a long moment. The words she had once longed to hear didn't bring relief. Instead, she felt something like sadness, not for him, but for what they had both lost. "I don't know if fixing it is what we need," she said gently. "Maybe we just need to stop pretending we're the same people we used to be." Mark looked down. "There's someone else, isn't there?" Emily froze. "No," she said quietly. "There isn't. But there is a part of me that wants to feel alive again. And I haven't felt that in a long time." He nodded slowly, and for the first time, she saw understanding in his eyes, the same kind of quiet surrender she'd seen in her own reflection many times before. That night, Mark left early, saying he needed time to think. When the door closed behind him, the house felt both emptier and freer. Emily walked down to the lake where Noah was standing, watching the sky clear after the rain. She stopped beside him, unsure what to say. He left. Noah asked softly. She nodded. We both knew it was coming. For a moment they stood in silence, the water calm and silver under the moonlight. Then Noah turned to her. "What now?" Emily looked at him, the man who had appeared at her door as a stranger and somehow become a mirror for everything she'd buried inside. "Now," she said, smiling faintly, "I start over." He smiled back, the kind of smile that felt like a promise. In the days that followed, the lake house changed. It became a place not of memories but of beginnings. Emily painted the kitchen, filled the rooms with fresh flowers, and opened the windows wide every morning. Noah stayed a little longer, helping her finish the last repairs. Their conversations were lighter now, hopeful, even playful. One morning, as Noah packed his things into his truck, Emily walked up to him. "You're really leaving?" she asked. He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her. "For now. I need to figure some things out. But I'll be back if you want me to be." She smiled softly. "I think I do." He looked at her for a long moment, then said the words that would stay with her forever. "Then don't forget what it feels like to choose yourself." As his truck disappeared down the road, Emily stood on the porch, watching the sunlight dance on the lake. She felt something deep inside her shift, not loss, not longing, but peace. Months later, the lake house had become her new beginning. She hosted friends, wrote again, and found joy in small things. The smell of rain, the warmth of morning light, the quiet hum of her own thoughts. And every now and then, she'd catch sight of a truck in the distance, slowing near the gate, and her heart would remind her that some stories don't end. They simply find a new rhythm. Because sometimes a stranger doesn't come into your life to change who you are. Sometimes they come to remind you who you've always been. And on calm nights, when the wind whispered across the lake, Emily still heard his voice in her mind. Don't forget what it feels like to choose yourself. Right? It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was her truth. It was her freedom. It was the quiet beginning of everything she'd once been afraid to imagine.